Good morning and welcome to another Oxford Sandy and Black Pig Group podcast. Yours truly here again, Andrew O'Shea. We're here this week. The podcast is a replay of the artificial insemination event that we held at the end of April with a lady called Lucia Gregson, who talked to us about the AI process and a lot of the science behind understanding the best methods and the best ways to approach it. It's a really interesting evening with lots of good questions. So I really hope that the replay inspires you to have a go at AI yourself. And before we get to that replay, just a few news items. So our next event is on Wednesday the 26th of May at 7:30 p.m. It's about nutrition and getting the most out of your pigs, with a lady called Victoria Phillips, who's a well-renowned expert in pig nutrition. I was lucky enough to meet her on an AHDB seminar a few weeks ago. It was very interesting, and I think as a group we could benefit from that. So if you look on the Facebook group or go to the website down the right hand side, there's the events list and you click on the link to register. You must register your details to get your own unique Zoom link so that you can attend the session. We also released our butchery series at the beginning of this month. The first part is out there on breaking down the primals of the pigs. The second episode will be out in a week or so, towards the end of May, and that is looking at making the most of the shoulder primal and what you can do with that. We're also bringing a new item to our shop later this month. Some polo shirts, branded polo shirts with our logo on it, for our members to purchase. They will be a price of £19.99. They come from sizes from small all the way up to 7XL. Most are in stock. If they're not in stock, they'll be able to be ordered and delivered to yourself. Just a reminder that those sales through the shop support us as a charity in putting money back into the fund, so we can produce things like the podcast. The service that we use for that costs £15 a month. Our Zoom facility as well, that costs us money every month. So, without the input from you guys supporting us, becoming supporters of the charity or making a small purchase through the shop, etc., that is what keeps us going, and we're very thankful for that. Right, without further ado, we will go to the replay of the artificial insemination event.
We have got Lucia Gregson. Lucia used to work at AHDB Pork, so I don't know if some of you have seen her or met her before, but I've certainly known Lucia from there. Lucia now is, she did a dissertation, and most of you would have read it. I put a little post up about Lucia. Very clever young lady. Did a dissertation in AI. Now works for, I was nearly said the organisation, but I forgot, but a large pig organisation. And I'm going to hand it over to Lucia. What we're going to do, if everybody stays on mute, please, there's going to be the little chat button. Any questions that you've got, please put your questions as we go along on the chat, and I will ask Lucia the questions on your behalf. At the end, if there's any other questions, then of course, please ask. It'll be a free for all, and Lucia will just go through them. So let's enjoy the day. So over to you, Lucia, please. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. As Kim said, a few of you may know me from my days back at AHDB. I left there in 2019 and I became a fields person for the largest pig producing company in the UK of higher welfare pork. So my job role there is a fields person, which means I've got responsibility and advice for farms. So I look after breeding units, and I have a bit of a focus on farm assurance. And prior to HDB, so as Kim said, my background is actually AI. That's how I fell into pigs. And yeah, then that was it really, fell into it. It's stayed with me since. So obviously tonight's topic is not just AI, but with a focus on heat detection as well. So if we jump to the next slide, what I'm going to do is kind of just do a little bit of anatomy, biology slides very briefly, just sort of to help kind of tie things together. So I'm going to start with boars. So again, most of you probably know this, so hopefully it's not teaching you to suck eggs or anything like that. So process of sperm production, typically it takes around 40 to 45 days, or the equivalent of 6 weeks. So we start in the testes, and in the testes are what we call Sertoli cells. These are really for sort of sperm development and mediate hormones. So after a number of divisions, you end up with basically baby sperm known as spermatids. And this is sort of where they gain the shape. And this process is what takes the longest, which is around 36 days average. After that, we then move to the epididymis. So it's kind of a bit like a microenvironment, and this is for storage, transport, and maturation for the sperm. So at the start of the epididymis, or the head, sperm basically become more concentrated, and the head incorporates the proteins into the membrane that are essential for when they need to fertilize an egg. That's what we call an acrosome. So then we move to the midsection, and this is when sperm tails start to become sort of gain mobility. At this point, they still can't move though physically because they're still too concentrated. And then after that, we go to the tail end, which is sort of where extra proteins are added for fertilization. This process is around 9 to 12 days. And then after that, we go through the accessory glands where we get seminal plasma. Some of you might call that Borgel. And then obviously final journey via the vas deferens. And then once you provide stimulation, obviously when he's with the sow or the gilt, smooth muscle contractions are what push the sperm to be transported down and out the penis. So I don't know if you want to stop now for any quick biological questions, but if not, we'll hop on to the next slide. So I wanted to do a little bit of a focus on sperm quality, because I think it's a term that's thrown around a lot, but not very well understood. So there's a few pictures on here, which I thought would be quite handy to refer to. So sperm quality, it's not kind of just a good or bad. We've got a breakdown into different categories. So this is what we would look at when we were in a stud to determine whether semen was viable for use or not. And that's morphology, volume, count, motility, the sort of protein head integrity, the acrosome, and colour and smell. Please note, I'm not asking you to go and smell semen. Please don't do that. It's just when it comes in through the stud, you can kind of tell if it's been contaminated that way. So we'll start with morphology, which is the slides that are mostly to your right, which is what we look down the microscope. So there's different things to look out for in morphology. So if I start with the picture that is on the right where it says C and D, that's what we call droplets or cytoplasmic droplets. These are known as either proximal or distal. So the little proximal one, which is right at the picture C, that is a proximal droplet. So it's very much a case of indicates immature sperm, very common in younger boars, or if they've been mated too early or collected from too early. Distal droplets, again, it's where it's obviously transported a bit further down the tail through maturation. And typically these are in theory meant to drop off, but doesn't always. So the best way I can describe how that impacts fertility is if you imagine trying to swim with a sandbag on your back, and it makes it quite difficult and can also cause sperm, rather than having a forward motility, they will spin. So they will actually swim in a circular motion. And then you've got some other obvious ones, which are your abnormal heads. So this can include detached heads, just general funny shaped ones. So the picture that we've got on the bottom right corner is a normal head. It's that very almost rectangular look. And what you'll see at the top of that is ever so slightly in that picture, there is a dark patch at the top, which almost looks like a little bit of a halo at the top of it. That is basically the acrosome. And if you look at the top picture, or what they've described as acrosome lifting, this is when you can tell if a sperm is alive or dead and whether it will be able to fertilize an egg. If you saw the top picture down a microscope, that is an invalid sperm, because ultimately it means the proteins around the head, it's basically come away, which means it just can't fertilize the egg. And then you've obviously got abnormal tails as well. So quite a nice one to see is the bent tails, which, as you can imagine, they can't swim. They've got no motion to push themselves forward. And you can have detached tails as well. Or as you can see, there's the middle picture that's got the two circles round. That one shows you how it's bent at the top and at the mid piece. So that's kind of a brief morphological view of things. Volume varies between boars anyway, based on quite a few factors like age. But obviously, I think the phrase "more the merrier" is probably quite welcome here. So that is another thing we do look for. Boars vary how much they can produce. It could be anything from 200. I've had a boar at the stud I used to work at that managed to produce 1.5 litres. So it does vary. Sperm count, pretty obvious. It's how many sperm has been produced. So it's billions, basically. Billions and billions that are produced. You can tell usually by the actual colour of the semen how thick it is. If it comes out watery, which is quite common in boars that have mated for the first time, then you haven't got a lot of sperm in there. And then the thicker it is, it almost comes out like quite creamy consistency. So the next one is motility. Arguably one of the most important factors in sperm quality. If it can't swim, it's not going to do its job. So it's highly impacted by production and morphology. So if you have a boar that is under stress, it means they produce sperm that basically aren't motile, and they will come out dead. And then morphology, as I've said before, the droplets, bent tails really restrict movement. And then as for colour and smell, again, it all links back into one another. But as I said, colour-wise, it's more relevant for contamination than anything else, because as you can imagine, there's cases where semen that I've seen collected before comes out brown or with a reddish tint, which immediately means it's been contaminated with blood. In that case, it can't be used, because that again will impact your motility and your morphology. And then as for smell, I just thought I'd put it in there as a bit of a fact. I have smelt it as part of my job, and you can generally tell then if it's a really bright yellow straw colour with the smell of and urine. That is obviously when you can tell you've obviously had a contamination there. So that was just a little bit of an overview on quality and what we would look for in a stud, and what would be sent out to you, and what we'd class as viable sperm. So next slide, please. So I kind of want to do a bit of a cause and effect slide.
Lucia, sorry, just one quick question. I just couldn't get myself off mute quick enough. A quick question was, is it easy to test fertility in a boar for us small producers, so the smallholders? Is there any test that we can use?
I mean, it's a difficult one because it requires different equipment. The basic way of doing it is via it can be done via microscope. So for morphology, you have to use a stain, otherwise you obviously can't tell, which is there's a trick to getting the slide right, prepping the slide, because if you do it wrong, you can in fact attach the heads, which would make it look like the quality is poorer than it is. Motility, quite an easy one. As long as you've got a microscope and a slide, you can tell quite quickly if it's moving or not. What you want to make sure of is that you have almost like a bit of a wave motion going on. What you don't want is a load of circles, because your indication then is that you've got some morphological errors in there. And obviously, if you imagine pushing down to the into the cervix and the sow, if it can't move properly, it's just not going to do anything. So it can be done with a microscope and slide, but I think you've got factors to consider, like you probably need a heating plate so that you keep your slides warm. If you do it without, you would be putting the semen would get cold shock, which would impact your morphology and your motility. So the easiest way I can say on farm is with a microscope, but it's getting your hands on things like stain if you really want to go into the morphology side. You just want to look at motility. It's pretty easy, microscope and a slide. Just make sure it's warm.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So yeah, cause and effect. Quite a few factors that influence production of sperm and its quality, both environmental and genetic. So breed, natural variation in sperm quality, that is what I did my dissertation on. You tend to find, you'll probably notice naturally, there might be differences for those of you who have got different rare breeds on site, that perhaps some of them have a higher libido than others, or they're more interested in the gill or the sow. What you tend to find is that what I'd call a meatier breed, so what typically tends to be a sire line in a commercial herd, the quality isn't as good as those that are a dam bred, which is obviously for your mothering ability. So you will find a little bit of natural variation genetics wise. It's just how it is. Age is quite a big one. I think it's easy to think with boars that they're ready to mate after 5 or 6 months, because that's typically when they hit sexual maturation. But the problem is that technically, by the time you factor in sperm production, really your ideal time to start mating is when they're about 8 months old. Just because if not, you tend to find what they'll produce is probably a bit more of a watery like semen with sort of a few more abnormalities in it. And then again, like as I've said, concentration and motility are likely to be impacted by this testicular development in a younger boar. And then we go to the opposite side of things, which is your old boars. So naturally, as boars get older, you tend to find production is better, so more volume. But there is sort of a peak where you will sort of see this starts to decline. And that's usually roughly when they hit about 3.5 years old. It's just basically bog standard of the parameters that we look at in stud just tend to decline. So motility drops, morphology isn't as good just because they're older boars. So anatomy, more to do with the testicular development than anything. It's not usually such a huge impact, but size of the testes can impact. Just like if you've had born, if you've obviously looked at piglets and you've seen perhaps maybe they've got a retained testicle, that can also again impact your production anatomy wise. I think, Kim, I've seen a few questions pop up there.
There's one question. It says, do these ages apply in general, or do commercial, or is it more to do with the commercial rather than the rare breed?
It will apply to all.
Okay.
It will apply to all. As you can imagine, it's just sort of a bit of just really nature, to be honest. So yeah, it will apply to your rare breeds. You might, I mean, typically you'll probably be able to get more out of your rare breeds than we would on a commercial herd, because we don't really keep them past 3.5 years for that reason, if they aren't able to effectively do the job. And at this point, I think you've got to think about libido as well for it, and probably one to consider on size as well is actually the general size of the boar. And in regards to your sows that you're serving, that he'd be serving, it's very easy for natural matings to go wrong if the sizing isn't right. So if you imagine 3.5 years old, these boars are probably going to be I'd imagine you're probably about 300 kilograms. So you've got to factor in that as well for your mating. And then if I hop on to the next one, which is sort of disease and general illness. So, oh, sorry, there are a few questions.
Sorry, Lucia.
Right.
One question before we go on to the next one. It was, does the amount you work a boar impact on their longevity?
So I was actually going to jump onto that one. That is on my list. It's coming up. It's coming up. So, sorry, if I just hop back a slide. So yeah, disease and general illness on a boar is quite a big one. You'll know naturally if they're feeling a bit rough, they've potentially got they're probably going to have a bit of a temperature. Temperature is a nightmare for boars and semen production. It is the one thing that has probably one of the biggest impacts, and that's via environment or via illness. Basically, when the temperature increases, it's got the potential to cause changes like so pH changes or osmosis changes, and that in turn basically just throws the quality of the sperm out the window. Naturally, the testes they're outside the body, obviously, and they are naturally a couple of degrees cooler than the boar's body temperature. So when they become overheated, they get heat stressed, and that just directly impacts onto sperm production, which is why when you're arranging, for those of you who are boar sharing, consider the fact that if your boar has been a little bit ill, it can take up to 6 to 8 weeks for that for the sperm to then rejuvenate itself. So if he's been ill and he's due to go away the next week, the chances are he may still produce good semen. I'm not saying he won't, but there is a chance that it could be impacted by that. So consider that when you are arranging this. And also consider for those of you who vaccinate a little bit like with us. Don't know how many of you have had the COVID jab. I'm not one of the lucky ones yet, or your flu jab. People, you tend to have a bit of an achy arm, feel a bit rough. It's not to say it's the same with boars. You know, sometimes it can make them feel a little bit bleh afterwards. But again, if that temperature increase is caused sort of by this reaction to a vaccine, we then end up back again at poor semen production. So kind of, again, linking back in temperature and season, pretty self-explanatory. Heat stress, bad sperm production. the cold doesn't really have as much of an impact. The time you may see it is when we've got really, really low temperatures. I mean, like -10, and they have to increase the feed intake to keep body temperature up, which means occasionally they might produce too much heat by the body and affect it that way, but it's very, very rare. So just to answer, so going on and answering the overworking question, yes, you can impact it by overworking them. So in a stud, we wouldn't collect the boar more than 3 times over a 2-week period. This is just basically down to the fact you have got to give him time to rejuvenate. And again, you've got to factor in this 6-week cycle. So if you imagine he is with, I mean, a few girls, it's not too, it's not too heavy. But after a while, if he's constantly used week after week after week, he's going to have a low sperm count because he just hasn't got the time to rejuvenate for what he needs to do. So yeah, you can actually affect sperm production by doing that. The same can actually be said for underworking him though. So there's occasions where if they haven't been worked as they need to, so for instance, we used to collect a boar once a week or once every 2 weeks, irregardless of if we would use that semen or not, because if not, you tend to find there's a little bit of almost a bit of a backlog. So you kind of end up with over concentrated sperm, and that can impact a little bit on your morphology and motility. Again, social as well. Sometimes not having contact with other males and females, it reduces that libido and stimulation, and it's actually been linked to lower sperm volume as well. Nutrition, I'm not going to jump too much into this. There's different diets impact sperm quality, but I think the more point of this is when you've got overfit boars. If you think he is a bit of a chubby fella, he's going to have a poorer libido, and he's just not going to be interested in doing what he needs to do. So that's sort of my little cause and effect slide, and just consider things like this when you are boar sharing, or for those of you that want to look into AI. But yeah, mainly for those who are boar sharing, do factor this in.
So Lucia, when does a boar stop producing sperm? Does it stop producing sperm?
Not that I'm aware of. I think it will continue because they don't. I think it can eventually, because each individual cell in the testes can produce a certain amount. So I think eventually, as those cells, as the boar gets older, cells die off. But I don't think I don't think they will ever stop altogether. I think it'll be reduced as we've seen in age, but I don't think it'll ever purely stop.
Okay.
If I could have the next slide, please. So that was my little boar one. So I'm going to jump on to the sows and gilts now. So estrus cycle. I think there's a trap to fall into here because we assume it's every 21 days. Don't fall into that. There is variation, and you will typically see this a lot in your gilts, that actually it can last between 19 and 23 days. So during this process, we've got 2 phases, which are follicular and luteal, and that can be broken down further into 4 categories. So you've got proestrus, estrus, metaestrus, and diestrus. So in this follicular phase, basically what happens, the egg mature, it's basically the egg sort of maturing phase. So you've got your hormones like estrogen and the follicle stimulating hormone that are released by the body to prepare for the estrous cycle. So basically after this, the oocyte, or basically this sort of the egg, this is where it will reach maturity. So once these hormone levels have peaked, there's some of the eggs are in the follicles. These will rupture, and this is when this period of ovulation occurs. And this typically lasts for 24 to 48 hours and is the peak time of when you want to inseminate. Now, again, it doesn't mean to say it will be that window. It varies. For some, it could be 30 hours. For some, it could even last up to 60. Again, with gilt, you tend to find that this period is shorter in comparison to sows. So that is, again, something to keep an eye on. So after this follicle has ruptured and ovulation occurs, we go into the luteal phase. So the hormones at this point have now declined, and you'll find your sow won't actually be receptive to the bore, or for those of you who are inseminating, to any of your stimulation. So the follicles, sort of at this point, will also start to develop into what we call a corpus luteum. And this is at this point where determination of pregnancy occurs. So if a viable sperm has actually managed to make its way down there, we carry on through to pregnancy. So if a viable egg isn't actually detected and it's not been successful, hormone called prostaglandin is released, which this breaks down this corpus luteum, and then that's when we kick back in and our cycle jumps back to proestrus and we start the whole cycle again. So I didn't want to focus too much on the biology, but I just thought it was probably handy to give a bit of a brief overview. And so if you hop onto our next slide.
Lucia, just
hello.
Someone missed a bit about the boar. It says, how often should a boar be serving a sow for optimum performance from the boar? What was it that you said?
So I would say I wouldn't do it more than 3 times every 2 weeks was what we used to go by at the stud.
Okay.
Which you know, he will do his job. If he senses that she's in heat and she'll stand, he will do his job. What you don't want is for him to be sort of back to back on weeks. Just to give him a little bit of a rest so that, like I say, he gets that rejuvenation.
Thank you.
No problem. So next we've got environmental and sort of genetic factors, again, cause and effect. Very similar to what you will find in the boar, except this time I am going to put more of an emphasis on nutrition. So for those of you who have already had the experience with litters, you'll be aware that during lactation she loses a little bit of condition because she's milking so hard. It's really important throughout lactation, and especially those first 7 weeks after she's been weaned, that you focus on the diet, because during this period, that is obviously again when she gets ready for ovulation and egg production, and nutrition does have a big impact on that. So it's looking at your feeding regimes, making sure again that she isn't overfit or she isn't underfit. So again, look at your condition scoring. If she's looking quite skinny, give her a little bit extra. If she's looking a bit too big, take it down a little bit. And obviously lactation is obvious because that is a really hard period for her. But again, all impacts onto this egg production. So obviously just briefly covered body condition there as well. Again, same thing with disease and illness, similar things. It's going to impact her. There's a few viruses out there that are particularly bad for reproduction. So quite a few of you will have heard about blue ear, or what we call PRRS. That can affect reproduction. As can things like parvovirus and leptospirosis. These all have the ability to affect issues, can cause mummified fetuses. So again, they never develop properly. And So keep keeping an ear out for when you're again sharing that you might potentially be going into a very pig dense area, and as PRRS is airborne, it doesn't take a lot to pass really, and birds and things like that can also carry it. So just a little consideration if she's looking a little bit off. Just, you know, have some thought of, oh, actually, could it be this?
Sorry. So on that note, Lucia, is there a recommended vaccine strategy?
Yeah, so I mean, basically the PRRS vaccine doesn't necessarily have to be used because it is, I believe it's a live vaccine. So on our commercial units and probably quite widely used along a lot of others, if they have to vaccinate for that, they do it every 3 months in what we call a blitz. Things like parvovirus, leptospirosis, they are covered quite a lot in your standard vaccines. So there's things like PCV2 MHIO, there's the EPL vaccine. There's a lot out there, and this typically works on a case of she's vaccinated 3 and 6 weeks before Farron, just to make sure she's safe.
Okay, thank you.
So stress, again, you'd be surprised how much this impacts, especially early on during ovulation, if she's stressed, and whether she would basically return, and things like basic husbandry and handling are really big stressors. So moving her via trailer can be stressful. Even just moving her paddocks can be quite a stressful process. So just on that, just, you know, as I'm sure you all do anyway, just take your time with them. I've seen on the Oxford Sandy and Black group, I know especially Georgina likes to go for a stroll. Just let them do what they need to do and bring them back in their own time. Just keep everything calm in this process, and that does include AI as well. And obviously with the boar as well, it's probably worth sometimes separating them until probably you suspect probably about 24 hours before she's due to go into this ovulation period, just so then she's not been badgered by him. And occasionally you can see it in other sows where they will pester and badger. Just sometimes separate her off if you notice she's been a bit nudged around by some of the other girlies that you might have, if they're not already in separate paddocks. And again, age, I mean, those of you who've got gilts will know they are a bit of a pain. So yeah, again, it's really similar to boars. They hit 5 to 6 months maturity, but still not the right time to mate them. You'll find most places don't actually start AI in gilts until they've kind of had that first ovulation cycle. And then obviously older sows, bog standard, there's so many eggs for reproduction. So I don't know if anyone's got any quick questions on that before we go to the next slide.
Nope, can't see any questions that have come up.
Next slide, please.
Oh, no.
Oh, we're there. I was going to say I was waiting for something to go wrong with the technology, but okay, heat detection. Pretty much, it is a skill. It really is a skill, and it is all about watching and your attention to detail. Excuse me, my dog's just entered the room, so if you hear panting, that is my dog Bowser. It is very much a case of having your calendar and making notes of what you see and just watching your girlies. Typical signs, probably what I'd imagine you probably already know anyway. You'll find that the vulva tends to get a little bit swollen and quite red, pink coloured. The sow or gilt herself, quite agitated, quite restless. So she may very well start trying to mount other sows, which is what is that is the red swollen vulva and the agitation. That is actually a sign of sort of pre-estrus. So this is sort of 24 hours before she's due to ovulate that you'll find these signs. And also standing reflex. If you put pressure on her back, she won't stand. She's not ready to be served. When we jump into this ovulation period, we end up with the exact opposite on reflex, where she will stand stock still once the pressure is applied to the back, or if the boar tries to mount. So at this period as well, you'll tend to find the vulva's a little less swollen. Her ears are pricked up, a lot more receptive to the boar. You might find she has a bit of a sort of soft, low-pitched grunt. So it's just about breaking those signs down and thinking, actually, right, okay, she's not quite ready, but I know tomorrow I'm probably going to need to serve, which is why I say have a calendar, mark when you're seeing these signs, and then that way, as you go on over time, you will find it's a little bit easier to track her cycle, which when coming to AI, you're going to have, you're going to get to her at the right time. And because it is such a short window, it obviously makes it even all the more important. So that's really all I can say is record your findings, just record everything. Doesn't matter how silly it might seem to you and you think, oh, she just seems a little bit more not herself than usual. Make note, because it is all relevant. And sort of stimulation as well. This is where boars do come in handy. So for those who want to AI, you don't want the boar in the pen with her because he's likely to serve her before you do. But having him next to her in a different pen, you'll find she's stimulated by smell, just by chatting, and that makes the difference and actually can make it a heck of a lot easier for heat detection as well. Next slide, please.
Going off feed, was that another sign of a sow going off?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it is another sign. She might just not be as interested in the food.
Okay, and the boar pheromone sprays that you can readily purchase.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing is ever going to replicate the true scent of a boar. So there's one particular spray called Boar Mate that's available, and there will be, I will say now, there's other ones out there. It's just ultimately, like I say, it's a pheromone. I don't know how many of you have used them, but the idea is that you spray the can about sort of 30 centimeters away from her nose, just so she can get that intake of smell. I suppose if you were planning to serve her in a particular pen or a stable, is just maybe add a little bit just to the walls or something, just so she's not too much because you don't want to overpower her, but just something that helps gain her interest.
And what age would you say a sow becomes unproductive?
It depends on how you look at it. So I have to have two different heads on this because I have a commercial head and then I have to think about you guys as rare breeds. So I mean, it's really, really difficult because she'll keep going for as long as you want. Eventually, you'll just find that the litters eventually just do decrease in size, which is when you can tell she's starting to become more unproductive. So it's difficult to give a bog standard age because I know I've known some of the commercial herds who've kept back sows that are up to what we call parity 12, so they've had 12 litters. Might not be massive litters, but she's still going, so she can go on for years, but I think you've just got to look at the size of your litters, and also is she things like, is she returning a lot? So is she not getting pregnant, which is really the easiest way to put it.
Okay.
I think Gwyn's just asked a question there as well.
Oh yes, he said, is it easier to heat detect if the sow hasn't had boar contact for a period before you heat detect?
Yeah, so having them, this is where it's quite good to have them separated, because we don't allow boar contact for at least 24 hours prior to ovulation, because she's then really overly stimulated and you've missed that chance to do your heat detection. So I would, a few days beforehand, when she's weaned, and you've weaned, speaking from if you've had a girl that's had a litter, when you wean them off, for those of you who do have boars on site and keep them in the same pens, what I would do is have a gap in between, obviously don't restrict her viewing him. That's probably it's not a very clever idea. It's probably quite stressful, but having like a little bit of an air gap is something that can help as well. So onto the fun stuff for serving. So I've managed to find a wonderful picture as well, which is why it's made its way onto my presentation. The stimulation is the one thing that I think is really underrated. And probably sometimes a little bit forgotten about. People don't always, it's not a case of just shove the catheter into your girlie and she's away. Stimulation is pretty much everything, and it just makes your process so much easier. So those of you that have seen the actual process of a natural mating, you notice he will nudge her sides and a flank, and before he does anything. This is effectively foreplay for pigs, and that's something you need to replicate before. Marvin Gaye does help, yes, that does help. I'm not sure, maybe that's a dissertation to do, what music helps the best. But you need to replicate this before you AI a pig, because again, she's not really going to stand there if you just, she might, if she's really in heat, she will just stand with her hand on her back. But I think it's quite good to get her really sort of ready and raring, just by gently sort of stroking her sides and just imitating what the boar would do. So obviously, for those of you who mentioned boar mate there, I've just put it in this slide. A handy thing to have. And the chatting. So again, this is really difficult to replicate. I don't know how many of you have ever tried to chat like a boar. I don't think it's possible. So this is where what we call a teaser boar is quite useful. So what you would do in the event of serving is you would have your boar behind a gate, but he would still be able to see and chat to your sow. But obviously he's not going to serve her. For just what it says on the tin, he is a teaser boar, but she's got stimulation, which means she's more likely to stand better for you when you serve, and her actual intake of the semen, you will be surprised how quick they can actually take a bottle from serving. It's quite impressive. So next slide, please.
Lucia, would you also say, with regards to size of the boar, we've also got to be cautious of how big the boar is compared to the sow?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a 300 kilo boar on a little 150 kilogram girl, that's no match. You are going to end up with broken backs, broken legs. It's seen on commercial herds, very rare, but it does happen sometimes where if the boar's just not sized right, it can cause injury. And it's really, if you imagine, that's a lot of weight to be having on you. So really do take time into matching your sizes, because if not, you could end up, ultimately, if it isn't done right, the chances are you may have to have your pig put down. And it's not just the sows, again, it can be for the boars if he's too little. I've known boars to break their legs. So yeah, sizing is really, really important. So down to insemination, the good stuff. I've kind of broken this down into a couple of sections. So I'll start with hygiene. Never underestimate the power of this. So what I would say is, for those of you who are interested in doing this, blue roll. It's a wonderful thing. When she's stood there chatting to the boar and you're ready to serve her, just get some blue roll and just wipe off the vulva, because ultimately what you don't want to be doing is having a clean catheter going in with a load of dirt into it, because you're putting that directly into the cervix and you're going to increase chances of infection. Wear gloves. Again, it's up to you. I know a lot of people that don't. I don't when I've served. But it's just an extra precaution. And don't contaminate your catheters. So for those of you who've done it, you'll know that the packaging that it comes in is just a thin strip of plastic. Best way to do it is to just pop the sponge end of the catheter out of the package without touching it. It will just break through the plastic. It's not a problem. And then that way you're not touching it and then inserting anything into, again, the cervix and higher your risk of infection. Lubrication. There's no such thing as enough lubricant. If you know, it's unpleasant putting a dry catheter into a girly. It's not nice. You want a smooth sort of transition into the vulva. So what I would say is keep an eye that it is semen friendly. I've seen somewhere there's like I think it's like liquid paraffin that's on it. Probably not the best of all of them, but I think you can get general I think it's like KY jelly ones that are really good, and they're fine to pop in. Again, just to help ease your catheter in, and it's just a whole lot smoother process for you and your sow. Stimulation we've already covered. So you've got to a point where your girl's standing, you've got her, she stood still, you've applied pressure to her back, and you've got to put the catheter in. So for those of you who've never actually done insemination before, it's not daunting, don't panic. It's a surprisingly easy process. So what I say is insert your catheter at a 45-degree angle, but you want this upwards. The reason I say this is because if you angle it wrong, you will in fact puncture her bladder. If you do this, you will soon know, because there will be a stream of urine coming out the other end of the catheter. So make sure you are going in at just a small 45-degree angle upwards. As you do that, you'll soon feel if you've gone in the wrong place, and you'll soon know. Insert slowly. You know, it's don't jam it in. That's not going to do anyone any good. Slow and steady wins the race. Push the catheter as far in as it will go, but do not force it, because if not, you've got potentials to puncture cervix and things like that. This will vary between your sows. I can tell you this now, not just in breed, but I mean between individual for your OSBs. You will find some girls will take up to half the catheter. She might have a small canal, and then there'll be other girls, and you think, my God, this catheter is not going to stop. So it varies. So don't panic if you've got one girlie that's taken about 3/4 and the other that's done half. It's totally natural. The way you can tell, I find, is when you're in properly is just by the tip of the catheter, which you can see in that picture there. I give it a little twist. So I twist it clockwise. What should happen is, when you're in the right spot, you'll find there's sort of pushback from it, so it will instinctively want to do that. That's because you're in the right spot. She's grabbed hold of it, which is what you want. You are in. You've got her. It's like a plug. She's in the right spot. So we've got the catheter in. Then comes the semen. Please do not squeeze the bag. The likelihood is that if you do it, it's either going to pop out and you're going to end up covered in it. And it's just, you know, this is her process. You know, she will take the semen in at her own time, and you will find that will vary. So the more stimulated and sort of in heat she is, the quicker she will take it. But again, the gilts in particular, gilts are a nightmare to serve. I find they are a pain in the backside. It's the first time, first time doing it, so it's very strange. And I would imagine for those of you who are bore sharing as well and doing natural matings, that sometimes she's probably a little bit funny with the bore, as if to say, "What are you doing?" It's all about it's not a rushed process. Never rush it, otherwise you aren't going to have the desired results. And then pretty obvious end to it all. Once she's taken in the semen, gently remove the catheter. You will find actually when she is finished and she kind of almost loses, I call it an airlock, it isn't, but where they've got this plug effect, she'll spit it out anyway, so it'll probably just fall out on her own. But once that semen is down the catheter tube, pull out, and then just dispose of along with the bottle. Just a note on sort of disposal. Semen, when it's delivered from a stud, comes with extender, and in this extender is antibiotics, so do consider that when you are disposing of waste. I don't know if anyone's got any quick questions. I know one that was highlighted at the start by Andrew, and I was quite glad he did, was what on earth is the green thing that is around the girly on the picture? That is what we call a bungee. So this basically imitates the pressure that's on the back and having the bore on the sides as well. That basically kind of means you've got a bit more freedom to have both hands doing the job that they need to, without having to sort of have one on a back and then put your catheter in, then the semen, and then having to put your hand back on. It just frees you up a little bit. Another way to do it, if you aren't looking to buy that sort of product, is actually just getting a bungee cord and just tying it around her, just to keep that pressure on her. So yeah.
With regards to catheters, is there a preference, Lucia? The sponge one or the twisted one?
So it depends on preference. I personally prefer the sponge ones. I just find they're just a bit softer and a bit easier, especially on your gilt, when I just find it's a little bit easier to work with. So I do tend to work with the sponge catheters. Nothing against the curly ones. That is fine. You can still use them. They do the same job. What I would avoid, because I can tell you on the company I work for, we don't use them, is what we call a deep insemination catheter. Now this bypasses the uterus straight into the cervix, and it's basically almost double the length of a normal catheter. And once you've inserted it, there is almost like a second tube that you push inside, and that bypasses. I hate them because if you aren't trained in it and you don't know how to use them, you can cause some damage. So I would just stick with the bog standard sponge or the twisted end ones. Doesn't matter which. It depends on preference. There are people that prefer the twist ones. But yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with a golden catheter. Yeah. I think.
And how often should we apply the semen? Once in the morning, once in the afternoon, or wait 24 hours?
So it depends. Again, this is depending on your timing and about your observations of her. guilt, I would say, because you naturally will have a smaller window, is if you can, try her once in the morning and try her again in the afternoon. For sows who have had a litter and things like that, you'll find just generally the period of the ovulation is just a little bit longer. So you could probably get away with doing once in the morning, and then the next morning go again. So you are hitting her twice in that 24-hour period. So typically on the commercial herd, we serve them twice minimum, but we do try 3 times if they will stand, just to ensure they are basically in pig. And yeah, it's not a daunting process. So for those of you who haven't done it and you think, oh, I don't know, I promise you it's not. It's just about just having the confidence and reading signals, and just being slow and steady. So if we jump on to the next slide. So this is kind of my little final slide, really. Just a few considerations for AI and the equipment that you'll need. So big obvious are the top 3: catheters, lubricant, and your semen. Again, where I've said that your recording and timing is relevant, especially important for when you've got semen on order. For those of you who are interested in doing multiple serves, you are going to have to consider your shelf life of your product, which is normally printed on the bottle, but your storage more than anything. So you'll be surprised how sensitive semen is. Basically, when it goes through a stud, it's cooled down to 17 degrees, and this is what, in the extender, it lies dormant. Once you've basically inseminated the sow, her body naturally heats that up and it wakes itself up again. So having a fridge at 17 degrees is really important for those of you who are, even if you are only ordering 2 bottles, but you're doing one day and one the next, and even those of you who are doing it in the same day, while it's fine to have it in that polystyrene box, and it does fine for postage, especially now we're getting into summer, I would be very aware that you do need to sort of have storage of about 17 degrees, whether that's in a fridge or you can get what we call an AI cool box. So that is an option, but do consider your storage. And if you have gone 24 hours and you've gone the next day and you've left it, give the bottle just a little bit of a shake. Please don't absolutely rag it to death, otherwise you will literally kill off the semen that's in there. It's just a gentle shake, just because the cells will lie dormant at the bottom. So it just sort of just mixes the solution back up again. And yeah, there are other videos and other sort of information that you can find sort of via AHDB. There's a lot of videos on YouTube. Just make sure you use a I try and find probably more of a UK video if you can. Yeah, for those of you interested, semen is ordered from Deer Park. So yeah, that's pretty much me on my slides really for AI. Hopefully it was interesting. It was, I think I made it quite quick. It's an hour, but hopefully if you guys have got any questions, or even if you want questions answering about how it's produced in stud or about the extender, yeah, I'll try and answer as many as I can.
Can the storage be too cold, Lucia?
It can, and it can also be, what we say is 17 degrees, plus or minus 2 degrees either way. What you don't want is in excess of 19 degrees, and what you don't want is too cold. If it goes below 15, you can do something called cold shock to the semen. So if that happens, you end up with bent tails, and that again affects your motility. So if you have a delivery, make sure you're in, because if it's on a warm day or if it's on a cold day, which I have experience with, it went wrong on my dissertation and someone left my AI out, and even though it was in its polystyrene box, they left it out overnight. It hit -2, -3, and I got to it the next morning and it was kaput. So yeah, just make sure for your deliveries that you're there to get them and that you can kind of get them stored and sorted straight away.
Okay. Has anybody else got any more questions for Lucia, please? In fact, I think you can just come off mute and ask directly if you wish.
Just shout them at me.
I have one, if that's all right. Sorry to be a pain.
No, it's okay.
We AI our cattle with semen that's quite old, basically, because they're so rare.
Yep.
And the success rate of that is horrific.
Yeah.
What's the success rate like when you AI a pig, basically? We've never actually done AI. We always serve with a boar.
Yeah. So your AI success rate, providing you do the process right and you've got your timings right, can be very high. I mean, commercial herds, conception rate varies from 80 to 95%.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah,
really,
really high success rate. Because you've basically almost got control straight away, because you know the semen that you're getting is viable straight away.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
No problem.
Lucia, I seem to remember, I think it was, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, there was, I was at, I think it was an AHDB pork meeting, and somebody from Spain came in and started talking about how it was very difficult to serve gilt. As you say,
Yep.
they're a nightmare. There was a new catheter that came out, and I think that's the one that you've just mentioned.
Yeah. So there is a couple of, I'm just going to put my light on, sorry. There is a couple of catheters that are available. So specifically, there is one that is what we call a gilt catheter. I think it's MS shippers that do this, but I can't remember off the top of my head if it is them. The gilt catheters are just ever so slightly smaller. So it just means like the tip at the end, for those of you who've used the golden cap ones, very similar in stature to that. All it is just it's ever so slightly smaller, and it's I think it's a very light blue.
Would you say it's better to use natural service on a gilt then than it is to AI because they're so difficult?
That depends, because if she's not had any experience of it whatsoever, it's almost more difficult, because the older she is, the bigger she is. So just sort of getting them used to it straight away is quite a good thing, because they know the process then. I think it is just a case of, it is all about your recording and your timing, and just marking down, like I say, we've seen this on this day, so I know actually in about a day or even less than, she's going to be ovulating. So say she this is where sort of the pressure on the back comes in, is that if she's standing, you know she's still in full heat. Eventually, obviously 24-48 hours, this will drop off. So after that sort of second serve, if you are choosing to do that, if you keep going back and putting sort of this pressure on her back, she's not standing, you know straight away she's out of heat. And that's when you can then mark, right, okay, I've got so many days left, so in theory she should be back on again in so many days time. So it is all about observing. It's a big part of things.
Any questions, anybody?
I've had a couple of DMs just saying, thank you very much, Lucia, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Oh, good. I'm glad you've all, hopefully it's been interesting for you all. And I wanted to make sure I could cover those of you who do boar share, and perhaps maybe do want to continue that as well. But again, still factors that consider everything. But hopefully it's been informative for you all, and it's been an enjoyable
Very
topic.
much so. So, I mean, I have a question working in technology, and is you can get an app for pretty much to do anything these days.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are you aware of there are any good apps for, you know, you said about making notes about your pigs when they're in, you know,
Yeah.
season and stuff like that. Is there anything out there that does that kind of thing for you, that, you know, to give you the reminder on your phone to say, you know,
yeah, I mean,
could be starting to look, or am I selling a
I'm not really
money off?
you should patent the idea.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of anything per se. I know of something called Pig Vision, which is presumably a few of you might have heard of something called Agrosoft. Pig Vision is something that comes off the back of this, which you record your details of your sow on, but that doesn't really tell you when she's next in heat. I'm not aware of anything out there, but if there is, please let me know. I would be intrigued.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think off the top of my head that I've heard anything like that.
I mean, I don't think it's a £1 million idea, because there's probably not that many people interested in it. But I mean, I think it's probably got some.
I think, yeah, it's definitely, you know, I think it's almost like you say, just putting a reminder in your calendar every month, sort of thing.
Yeah. I think it depends the way you work. So I mean, I have someone calls me quite regularly with questions about sort of livestock and you know, what's the right thing to do here, there,
mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
And they say, well, I wrote it on the calendar, or I wrote it in a notebook, or I've kept it on my phone, but I can't find the record on my phone. I can't find it. You know, and it's quite frustrating.
It's really...
So, I mean, I'm quite anal about keeping those.
Yeah, I think it's, all I can say is someone's just said Plan a Pig is an app on Apple. There might be a few things out there similar to be able to track a cycle. The only reason I say don't always rely on it being the same every month is because, like I say, typically the average is 21 days, but you might find one's going to be 19 and she might be 23. So don't rely on it being that same spot every month. I would give yourselves a couple of days beforehand from the last time, sort of when you've worked out when she's next due to be ovulating. Right. Give yourselves a couple of days beforehand so that you can actually go and just watch her, just watch what she does. Does she just, like I say, the typical sort of signs that you'll see, rather than just relying on, right, bang, she's going to be on this day. That's my only thing, is use it with caution.
Thank you, Lucia.
Can I ask, Lucia? I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of your presentation, and I don't know if you mentioned it. What boar lines are at stud at Deer Park at the moment?
Yeah, so I will just bring that up. Kim, Andrew, I don't know if you'll know any different from me.
It's only the only bloodline that's being used at the moment. There was it was the Jack bloodline at the moment, Tess, but I think they've changed it and they're going to bring back the St. Piers Alexander bloodline.
Oh, great! I've got a Jack. I don't need any more Jacks.
Yes. So I think that one's coming through at the moment.
Okay, that's good. It's useful. Thank you.
Quick question, Lucia. We've been AIing for a couple of years now, and we've had 100% success rate with our 2 sows. And since September, everything is just fallen off a cliff. We can't. Okay. They won't. The sows are 4 years old each now.
Yeah.
The teaser boar is now 8. Yeah. Suddenly stop. What would cause that?
So it could be a case of with your boar being quite old is that the lack of the interest just isn't there, and they're just more intrigued in sleeping.
That's definitely so. Yeah.
So that is quite it's something quite a lot of commercial herds fall down at sometimes, is when you've got a boar that's he's lazy but he stinks, so he's fine on the smell front but he's not chatting, and you almost find that chatting almost works better than the smell in some way, because there's that actual interaction. So whether you've got the chance to be able to bring, I don't know if you've got any other boars that maybe you can pull out from a litter, or a future litter that you can raise. So keep back a boar maybe that can replace him, not necessarily for breeding, but just keep him back as a teaser, just to see if that makes any difference. And just double check that again, if they've since September decided that, right, I'm not going to stand, just double check you haven't got any underlying health issues there as well.
Yeah, we checked them for worms. They're eating normally. Nothing apparent has changed with the two sows.
They're good condition. They're not too fat. They're not too thin. I do the chatting. I do the grunting.
The grunting, yeah.
But obviously not quite good.
Your video, haven't we, Anita?
Not good enough to produce results, but
all I can say
fall
is
off a cliff like the way it has done from.
So is she, as in, are they just not conceiving at all from it, or is it just
Well, we've tried five times since September.
Okay.
We wrote a couple of due to maybe seasonal infertility, but
I was going to say, obviously seasonal fertility and the weather we've had as well isn't ideal.
Last week we tried again, and Sow was quite happily nudging the boar to try and get him interested, and he just wasn't playing. He was happy sleeping.
So what I would say is, if you've got the ability to do so, is when you go for your next litter, I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't even necessarily have to be an Oxford Sandy and Black. If you have got other breeds that you keep on, just to, if it's purely teasable, just pick a boar out from your litter, grow him on, and just have him there as a teaser, just to refresh things.
Well, we've got 5-month-old meat weaners.
Okay.
Would they be just too young to?
They're probably just a little bit too young. As I say, they'll hit maturity, but because they're not sort of about 8 months old, they haven't got as strong a scent and a stronger interest as they would. So
we really need to think about another boar.
I would think about getting another boar to replace him, being 8 years old as well. I would imagine he's probably, like you say, if he's quite lazy, he's not interested. And obviously the sow is still interested. So I'd maybe think about bringing in a replacement.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
So okay.
Sorry, someone else got a question before I ask mine. So a lot of semen is stored in liquid nitrogen and sort of, there for whatever purpose. Is the process for, how's that semen rejuvenated for insemination when it's
so
frozen versus
frozen semen is not very commonly used in the pig industry, because it just doesn't, the process of it, of freezing, it's quite difficult. So by the time you have dropped the temperature to 17 degrees, and then you're gradually doing this cooling process, where it can be put into straws and into liquid nitrogen, it's you have to have a higher volume and concentration of semen in these straws, because you will find your motility in sort of fresh chilled semen. You're probably going to say you won't probably really find anything below 80% motility. When you get down to freezing, it gets to about 60-50%, because it just can't handle the chilling process very well. So when it's rejuvenated, it's a really strange way, but it's done by just sort of a water bath to get it going again, and just gradually bringing it up to temperature. So it's not really a common thing in pigs at all that's used. The only time I've ever had to do that process was for when semen was sent abroad. Otherwise, I'd just stick with chilled. Your success rate would be so much better. And plus, frozen semen isn't designed for normal serving. That is for when you're going for deep insemination.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I mean, I believe, and I could be wrong here, in the cattle industry, these frozen straws are used quite frequently, aren't they?
Cattle, yeah, used really commonly. But
what about my peacocks with the background noise? Sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. But yeah, just in pigs, because of I suppose I could say because of pig semen design almost. It just can't deal with being frozen, and like I say, by the end of it you'll find motility is about 50-60% when warmed up, and that is deliberately designed for people that will do deep insemination. It's just not designed at all. It's just not designed in general for pig usage. And I think that's just due to the proteins in the head of the sperm. That's what it boils down to.
So one final question, and it's not a loaded question at all. Is there any value then in these straws storing, older pig breeds?
There is, but I understand from protecting lines and older breeding lines completely as to why it's done. I would imagine it's like you say, it's more commonly used in cattle, but there'll be I know in sheep it's done as well for rare breeds. I see the value in that aspect of it, but I think you have to be quite careful as to how you go about it, because like I say, it's deep insemination, so it's a different serving technique altogether. So there's value in preserving lines, but the technique required is totally different.
A lot more scientific. It's not something that we would do as small scale producers.
It's not even something the commercial boys do. I don't know any of my units, or I've been at HGB and speaking to farmers, I don't know anyone that does that. The only, like you say, the only people who probably will use it are your pedigree breeds, but probably more towards your stud lines more than anything else to keep it going.
Yeah.
Which is probably where you guys preserving your breeds is quite handy, because you're not having to rely on this frozen semen. So yeah, I understand why, but for pigs it just isn't. It's I wouldn't go there personally.
Okay, thank you, Lucia. Yeah, so like I say, it wasn't a loaded question. I was generally
no, it's fine.
In the science behind it.
I did wonder if frozen semen would appear at some point. So yeah.
So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Has anybody else got any more questions? Because I think where are we now?
We are over by a couple of minutes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
So no, it's fine. Very interesting. Thank you. Well, unless nobody else has got anything else to say, I think it's good night from all of us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, everybody.
Thank you, Lucia. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure you'll all agree that was a very interesting session around artificial insemination. Hope you found it beneficial. That's it for this edition of the Oxford Sandy and Black Pig Group podcast. As usual, we're always out for people to sign up, come and talk to us, do a podcast about an experience or anything like that. So if you are interested or want to take part, please drop me an email, andrew@oxfordsandyandblackpiggroup.org. Well, that's it. Until next time, happy pig keeping.